Your fishing pole matters for the type of lure that you're throwing.
Okay.
Because in some lures, you need leverage. In other lures, you need the blank of the rod to bend or move to give you the vibration of the lure. Mm-hmm. Whenever you're fighting the fish, it becomes even more important.
This is the Aptitude Outdoors Podcast, where we interview conservationists, hunters, anglers, and outdoorsmen and women to bring you the greatest stories, information, and advice from the best in the world. All right, everybody, welcome back to the Aptitude Outdoors Podcast. Thanks for tuning back in. Today, our special guests are Stephen Bardin and Kanyan Klein. Well, Texas Pro Lake Management, a business that Stephen started back in 2011. He also started the Black Bass Stewardship Group with professional angler Gary Klein. And through this, they helped Major League Fishing found their fisheries management division, which Stephen leads in their conservation efforts to this day. And Kanyan currently assists in the management of the American Fisheries Society Habitat section, social media, and blogs. She's an instructor at Bass Brigade Summer Youth Camp and is Texas Parks and Wildlife Angler Education certified, also doing social media for Gary Klein, her father. So this episode, I hate to say it, is probably one of my favorite episodes I've ever done. Sorry, everyone that's ever been on the podcast, but I've learned so much about fishing, and Stephen really dispelled a lot of fishing myths that I've held true. I had to rethink my life as a fisherman, which is what you need sometimes. We also learned that apparently the fishing rod does matter. So I guess just don't ever listen to me about anything. I have no idea what I'm talking about. That's why I talk to the experts. Hope you guys enjoy this episode. I really love this episode. I learned so much. I hope you do too. But before we get into it, a quick word from our sponsor. I'm a huge fanatic for handmade, high-quality leather and canvas products. In my opinion, they last longer, hold up better to the abuses of travel, and honestly, they just look really cool. That's why I use Badger Claw Outfitters. They've been making handcrafted products for hunting, camping, and travel since 2011, and that's right up my alley. Best part is they're made right here in the USA and are guaranteed for life. They've got everything from gun leather, belts, custom knife sheaths, wallets, duffel bags, leather and canvas pouches, everyday carry items, and more. Badger Claw Outfitters, made in the USA, built for the wild. This episode was recorded live at the 2023 Hunt Fish Podcast Summit, where podcasters and guests from across the country come together to talk about their passions for hunting, fishing, and conservation. This year's summit is brought to you by Waypoint TV, Ron Hoover Marine of Galveston, Spot Stalker Guide Service, the Wild Sheep Foundation, Galveston Fishing Company, Captain Experiences, and Badger Claw Outfitters.
Steve, Kanyan, welcome to this beautiful ranch. Just found out yesterday you manage the lake here.
Yeah, I manage so many lakes in Texas. You guys show up and I was like quizzing everybody. I was like, how many fish have you caught?
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
The biggest fish I've ever caught in my life.
Congratulations.
Out of this lake. So I don't know a lot about fisheries. I'm just a dude that likes to fish. Okay. You two are experts on fisheries. So how does this work? Because I got a lot of questions for you for things that may or may not be legal for me to do in Michigan when I get back up there.
Okay.
I'm not quite sure of how to answer these slyly and not go to jail.
Uh-oh.
So fishing is complicated for a lot of people, and we all think we suck because we don't catch anything.
Right.
But in a lake like this, I walked out there with the same bait I use at home, plastic worm, cheap rod, throw it out there, catch the biggest bass I ever caught in my life in an hour.
Okay.
Go to Michigan, where my family has a place, do the same thing. Spent 5 years, I'd never caught anything hardly. What's the difference between a well-managed lake and a natural lake that's just running wild and free?
Yeah, that's so hard to believe that Michigan is awesome fishing.
Well, there's certain lakes that are
there
awesome.
We go. Okay,
there's certain that are not.
Well, so Paul, what you have here is you have a private lake. And the lake on the Warren Ranch that you're fishing is it's designed for kids.
Well, that makes me feel a lot better.
No, seriously, it had a fish kill about 4 years ago. At the time, the owner had applied some herbicide. It had some negative effects due to the amount of oxygen that was needed to decompose the plants, and it caused a fish kill in the middle of summer. And so we went to the drawing board and we were trying to figure out what to do. And he does host a lot of kids' camps here. He also does some stuff with wounded warriors and police officers. So he wanted a pond that was dedicated to making sure people could catch fish. And so how we manage it is by using the other lakes to provide fish to this lake through harvest. So we harvest other lakes and we move them here. So it's all happening within this one ranch, but they're moved to this lodge lake that you fished. So you got to see the best of lake management, where an owner selects a goal and says, I want these people to have a recreational opportunity that's exceptional, and I want it to happen quickly. And so we maximize everything to make that happen.
Okay.
That's exactly what we do. So here in the state of Texas, we have a lot of private lakes. And majority of our land is private as well. And so whenever I started my company, Texas Pro Lake Management, it's exactly what we were trying to do, provide professional lake management for private owners. I hired Kanyan Klein here. Her dad is Gary Klein, world famous professional fisherman. She happens to have a degree in wildlife and fish management and an MBA. And so I hired her to run our management aspect of our clients. So we have absentee owners that need a little more help. They need us to do things for us. And that's what Kanyan does. But you're seeing just goal-based management. You have a water body, you provide a goal, and we put a plan together to make it happen.
That's super awesome. And, I think when I think of like lakes where I fish, they're just, I don't know if they're managed or not. I would highly doubt it. They're probably like, there's people checking in on them, I would guess. The laws are much different up there. And I'm always confused by, I don't think I'm a bad fisherman. Okay. I think I'm an okay fisherman. I understand a little bit about like what they like to eat, what they're going after, specific species, and kind of what their gig is. Like I feel like I kind of got that a little bit. But like for instance, we'll go to one lake called Round Lake. I'll catch big bass. I'll catch pretty big bass. I'll catch whatever, perch, walleye, whatever's up there. Go to another lake, completely different lake, half the size, quarter the size of it. I can't catch a bass bigger than, say, 12 inches. Right. And though you can only keep bass 14 inches or bigger in Michigan. Okay. What's the big difference between those two lakes? They're like 20 minutes apart.
Well, let's start a little more broad. Okay. Whenever you have a black bass, whether it's smallmouth or largemouth bass or whatever, there's actually between 13 and 19 species of black bass. But smallmouth, spot, and largemouth are the ones we most often catch. Whenever you have them, whatever geographics they are within the United States kind of dictates their lifespan and their maximum growth and that growth rate in which they have. So as general rules, a fish in the southern United States has a shorter life, but will grow to a larger size.
Makes sense.
Okay, so its metabolism works a little faster, its growth rate is more every single year, but that shortens its life. Now, when I go up north, they grow at a slower rate, and they typically have a longer lifespan. So the fish you're trying to catch, at 12 inches, those fish really could be 5-6-year-old fish. Where here, a 5 to 6-year-old fish probably has a weight of 2.5 to 3 pounds and a length somewhere around 16 inches. So there's a big variability in that. The fact that here they have to be a little more aggressive because they have to keep up with that growth rate, competition, all those things. Where up north, they can have a slower lifespan. They don't have to be as aggressive. You key on what is the difference between this lake and that lake in the variability in habitat, fertility, so color and clarity, the food chain, competition, harvest rate, all those things combine to give you an expression of like, what do the fish look like? So if you have fish that are most often 12 inches, we would call that a stunted fish population. To me, that means the water is probably extremely clear, or on the other end of that scale would be super turbid, muddy. In Michigan, I would guess pretty clear. Yeah. Probably fairly vegetation rich, where we have a lot of aquatic plants. And whenever you have clear water and a lot of aquatic plants, you usually have a lower abundance of forage. Now, the forage could simply be the issue in the fact that one of those reservoirs could have a thriving yellow perch population, and the other one doesn't. Or, bluegill sunfish, kind of same thing. Like, it depends on the forage that's available. A lot of those fisheries have crawfish as one of the main forage items, and the crayfish are just really poor nutrient level for bass, so they don't get a lot of growth from them. But we have to take all those components to understand exactly what the fishery can produce. So every fishery has a carrying capacity, and you've just identified 2. Maybe they're similar size. Well, you said one was smaller, but their carrying capacity is very different.
So, Kanyan, where did you get an interest in this? I mean, your dad, fisherman, but I don't want to do the same job my dad had when growing up. So I'm kind of in this like wildlife world and doing all this cool stuff. So where did you get your passion for like understanding, especially fish? Fish are cool. I like fishing more than hunting. I really do. Right. So where did the passion come from? So
starting out in high school, I really didn't know what I wanted to do. And I was, of course, as a kid growing up, I was introduced to so much. But the, junior year, senior year of high school, going into college, everyone's like, what do you want to do? What do you want to do? What do you want to do?
So annoying.
Yes. I mean, you hear it over and over again. And I honestly had no idea what I wanted to do. But I knew I grew up fishing in the outdoors. Hunting and fishing was something that I loved and that I enjoyed. Yeah. And so years later, Dad had, the connection of meeting Steven. And then I was kind of introduced to because I had been introduced to the fishing world, but now I'm being introduced to the fishing world in a whole new, different perspective. And so I kind of, volunteered with Steven, and I did my undergrad internship through him. Cool. And, just one thing kind of led to another, and here I am now, working for him full time. And I absolutely love it.
You love it?
Yes.
You guys get dirty in the field? Muddy, gross?
Every day, absolutely.
That's always a good bonus.
When do we not?
Yeah. So when you're out doing your gig, managing lakes, ponds, and stuff, every client's going to want different stuff. So is bass the most common thing? Is that what people are managing for generally? Yes,
about 90% is largemouth bass. They want, the double digits, trophy, largemouth bass.
So I learned last night at dinner, we're just kind of hanging around talking, I learned about this thing that Texas does where if you catch a fish over a certain size, you call somebody and they come pick. What's that all about? What's that program all about? Because that's like the coolest thing ever.
That's the stuff right there. Yeah. So that program is actually called Texas Sharelunker Program. And I
love that.
It's a good name, right?
It sounds like we have Share a Ride up where I'm at. Like, you can park in it. That's a way better program.
And after I graduated college, I actually worked for a fish hatchery, the Athens Freshwater Fisheries Hatchery. And I was there with the Sharelunkers. And so I got to see the fish come in. We fed them goldfish in the tanks. It was pretty cool to watch that happen. And then, I would see them reproduce and see them go off to another lake. It was pretty cool.
So, what do you guys have access to that kind of fish, or how does that work? Where do they go when they're ready?
Yeah, so the Sharelunker program is a Texas Parks and Wildlife program. Okay. And there's a window when you can actually donate a fish, and it's January 1st through the end of March. Okay. So that it'll end on April 1st. When a fish is caught in a public reservoir, they call the Sharelunker hotline. A state biologist shows up, certifies that fish, and if it is a 13-pound fish or greater in good health, it'll be taken back to the hatchery that Kanyan was talking about. If it's a private water, we can donate our fish to the program. So if one of our clients caught a 13-pound fish, we can call up, they'll come pick it up as well. Here's the difference. If a public sector fish goes into the Sharelunker program, it is spawned, the offspring are released into public water.
Okay.
Majority of them go back to the reservoir that the female came from, but then others, the extra, are sent out to other reservoirs to fill biologist quota. As a private sector, if I donate a fish, those offspring also go to public water. They do not come back to the private water. Okay. So there's no way for me as a private biologist to get those offspring. I would get the fish back at the end of spawning season. They would bring the fish back and we could release it. But the offspring would be donated to the state as a whole.
So what is the maximum size fish that you think is like down the road could be potentially bred in this program? Like, what do you think the limit of bass size could get to?
Man, that's a great question. The world record is 22 pounds. But in California, Dottie weighed 25 pounds. She just was not caught legally whenever she weighed 25 pounds. But we know that there are largemouth in California that in the 90s and early 2000s were weighing above 20 pounds and
it's
up
like
to
catching
25.
a bowling ball.
It's bigger than that, yeah. Yeah, and in Japan, there was a world record fish caught 22 pounds as well. I mean, so there's, whenever you say like, what's the upper limit? Like the state record right now is 18. That record could definitely be broken. That could be broken by almost 10 pounds. You know, it just depends on if you have all the components that create that growth. But there historically, 25 pounds is the maximum size we've ever seen a largemouth grow. That's a Florida largemouth, and it would be hard to imagine a fish growing into the 30s, but
you never know.
That's like almost kind of scary. That could like put your your whole foot in its mouth and like pull you into the water.
Yeah, I mean a 25-pound largemouth the mouth on it would be like the size of a small trash can, like a waste bin. Yeah, that's
pretty awesome.
Yeah,
I can't imagine the amount of food that fish would eat every day.
Okay, that's great. So fish are cold-blooded, which means their metabolism is dictated a lot by the water temperature. And fish don't eat every day. They don't have to. A fish needs to eat about 5 times its body weight in a year to maintain its body weight. So a 20-pound fish only needs 100 pounds of forage in a year to maintain its body weight. A largemouth needs 10 pounds of forage to gain an additional pound. So a 20-pound fish would need to eat 100 pounds and then an additional 10 pounds to become 21 pounds. Now, the size food item that it's eating would dictate how many meals needed to happen to have that happen. A 20-pound fish could eat a half-pound largemouth, no problem. Mm-hmm. So that's 200 meals a year to maintain its weight.
So when we talk like anybody I've ever talked to that's caught big fish, we're talking like 10 pounds plus. Mm-hmm. They just say they're different. Mm-hmm. They say that's a different fish to catch because like you could probably go to this pond right now and everybody can go catch 4 or 5 pounders. Right. Pretty easily. I mean, I don't really know what I'm doing and I'm out there catching them like a kid in a kid's pond. No. Do you think that is inherently true, or do you think they could eat whole bluegill and they're just not as hungry, or do you think that they just are old? Like people say when geese get 20 years old and they've been shot at 10,000 times, they're keen on like those aren't real geese down there in the spread, so things like that. Do you think that's inherently true, or do you think that's just an urban legend that people keep propelling to as an excuse that they can't catch them?
Well, we do know that Florida largemouth bass learn lures over time. So we know that they become less aggressive, especially if you start with the same presentation over and over. Okay. So we know that it is fact. In general, they're less aggressive than northern largemouth bass would be. So Florida, if you catch a fish that's, let's call it over 15 pounds, it's most likely a Florida or has a big portion of its genetic as Florida. Those crosses, the Florida Northern Cross can reach that size as well, but most likely has a big proportion of its genetics as Florida. So that means it's going to learn lures. It's going to be lure shy in general, and it's going to be impacted by weather. Big changes like the cold front that came through. You noticed yesterday, you guys were catching them, cold front came through and it stopped. Florida genetic fish.
Immediately.
That's what you're looking at. Yeah, it's very weird. So I think part of what you're saying is true. They're going to learn their environment. They're going to learn what's natural. Then at the end of the day, they're also aggressive and curious. A bass doesn't have hands. Your dad says this all the time. Mm-hmm. A bass doesn't have hands. If it sees something in front of it and it's curious about it, the only choice it has is to put it in its mouth. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times a fish is going to bite by other reasons rather than food. They're going to bite out of aggression or competition, or they'll bite out of curiosity. So some of those components have to play into that. Now, you might say a larger fish is less curious because it's seen so many things, possibly. But I've seen a lot of crappie fishermen catch fish that are double digit. So those fish will still eat very small lures at times as well. I mean, they're still a predator that anything that fits in their mouth, they may just swallow.
Yeah. Well, Kanyan, when you went and got a master's degree, what was your major thing of study? Because you get to like pick your topic almost a lot of these times. What was your passion that you were like going after? Because it's one thing to get like a bachelor's degree in something and just be like, yeah, it's cool, I got the degree. But when you go to that next level, you're really interested in something. So what's that thing?
Yeah,
Everybody's got their thing.
I got my undergraduate degree in fisheries and wildlife. And then when I graduated, I went to the hatchery and worked. And then I went back to school for my master's. And I actually got my MBA in business administration. And there was a part of me that wanted a fisheries master's. But then there was another part of me that really wanted that business aspect of it. And so since I already had my fisheries and wildlife, I really wanted to be just a roundabout person and get that business degree and have that behind me.
So business is a huge part of fishing, hunting. I think people that don't fish and hunt don't realize how much money comes through fishing and hunting. It is big business, $1 billion industry, billion plus. So I think that's actually a pretty smart move because I'll tell you what, I wish I had an MBA because I don't know what I'm doing. Right.
Well, and also with that business degree, I manage all of Dad's social media. So I'm, his marketing team, social media team. And so allowing me to get that business degree, that has helped tremendously with managing his social media.
Social media's management is...
It's everything.
Yeah, it's a lot of work too, and I don't think people realize it because they're just like, I posted a selfie, woohoo.
Yes, but they don't know how much time and effort went behind that post.
So when you're doing social media management, what's your, fishing's cool, everybody likes fishing pictures, but everybody's posting fishing pictures. So what do you do? Like, what's your thought process behind it?
So when I post pictures for Dad, I try to think of out of the box. Why are people going to stop and look at this picture?
Yeah.
What can I make different about it? So if you ask Dad, he is not a fan of social media at all.
Did you guess that? 65-year-old man, not a fan of social media.
He doesn't understand it, and he doesn't want to take the time to understand it. But me being younger and getting that business degree, I push him. Social media is everything nowadays. That's how you brand yourself. And so, yes, with each post, it's critical. Every single day, Dad, send me a picture. Send me a picture, please. Send me a picture. And so I just try to make each post unique and try to tell a story. And I try to put myself in the fans. What would they want to see? How would they want to see it type thing?
Yeah, so do you do a lot of fishing? Sometimes when your life revolves around that, like when it becomes a job, it sometimes can be like, or do you still like to fish?
I live and breathe to fish.
Good.
I mean, it's a part of my job. It's a part of my life, my passion. I truly love to fish. Everybody's got their fish they like to go for. Oh, largemouth bass.
Still? All the time?
Oh, yeah.
That's awesome. I'm always torn between, I love catching crappie. They're just like a mini bass, but I feel like they fight just as hard. And they taste really good.
Oh, yeah, they do. Yeah.
Yeah, crappie. So there's a lot of people are specializing crappie. I don't specialize in anything. I'm just like to catch fish, honestly. But bass are fun. They're I don't want to say they're easy to catch because I wouldn't think that's a true statement. But once you figure out how to bass fish, you can bass fish.
And maybe I'm a little biased because I did grow up fishing bass all my life. So, but I mean, bass.
Personal best. What's your personal best?
It is. It's almost a 6. It's like a 5.74.
Better than me.
So I'm getting there.
I didn't measure my fish or weigh it yesterday. I just looked at it and said, that's the biggest fish I ever caught, and that's good enough for me.
That's all it takes.
Well, you've written multiple articles on the different types of bass. I think people just are like largemouth, smallmouth.
Right.
Is there 9 different species of black bass?
Okay, so yes. All right. How does this work? That's a great question.
Who are fish?
Who makes these decisions? So there is a group called American Fisheries Society, and any biologist can join as a member of American Fisheries Society, and we do what's called peer review of journals. So over time, what has happened is the genetic work has improved to where we understand like mitochondrial DNA, and we've sequenced genomes and things like that. And as we do that across the United States, we find that in these certain river drainages, the genetics of this bass does not match the genetic of the species that we thought it was, especially when we talk about like red eye bass and some of the smaller niche species. And so what you have is you have about 9 species that have been accepted by American Fisheries Society. Then you have up to 19 that have been described that are waiting for somebody to say, okay, yes, there's enough evidence that that is truly its own species. And this is the black bass family. So depending on which biologist you talk to, the number could be between like, let's call it 9, maybe more like 13 now.
Okay.
13 to 19, somewhere in there.
Okay.
And a lot of those might be isolated to single river drainages throughout the United States. And then you kind of draw the line of like evolution, like how far back do we want to go and say, okay, fine, that was a new species. But it's always this moving, and I would say that it's only going to become a little more cloudy over time. Then you have, on the opposite end of that spectrum, you have the stocking programs that occur within states. Like, for example, there are 3 genetic lineages of smallmouth bass.
Yeah.
But we consider the northern smallmouth bass to be smallmouth bass. And therefore, any smallmouth stocked within this country is a northern smallmouth.
Okay.
Even those smallmouth that are being introduced in the river drainages where the other 2 lineages live. So over time, we as humans are moving northern smallmouth and integrating those into those populations. We're doing the same thing with Florida bass. Florida bass are a different species than largemouth. Yet every bass stocked in the state of Texas is a Florida bass. So it's not what was native here. It gets very cloudy and messy.
It's very complicated. At what point do you, when you talk about different species or species waiting to be designated,
right?
Where is that line? Because I know, like, I understand basic genetics stuff, like at a surface level. Like, there's certain species of birds that like will eventually migrate apart, and at some point in time they evolve to enough where they can't interbreed anymore. So are these, when they say they're a specific new species, is that meaning like they can no longer interbreed at all whatsoever?
No, they'll hybridize.
Hybridize. Every
black bass species will hybridize with another black bass species.
So you could do it like, you could do a smallmouth and a largemouth?
Yes, that's called a mean mouth. Like OHIV is about 45 miles from here. They have the world record mean mouth, which would be largemouth, smallmouth cross. It gets complicated because also the spotted bass smallmouth cross is also called a mean mouth, and so is the spotted bass largemouth cross. So it gets this very muddy water. But if you look at IGFA, they have cross world records for several of the black bass species. So originally, like if we want to go back to the 1700s, you had smallmouth in the Great Lakes area.
That's where I'm from. Yep, I know them.
And then you had spotted bass and largemouth bass down the Mississippi and Ohio drainage into Louisiana. You had Florida bass in Florida and South Carolina, and you had Guadalupe bass in Texas. And then in Alabama, it's like where they rolled the dice and they're like, there's this bass and that bass and this bass, and they're all isolated to these river channels. So originally that's how it looked. And then in the 1800s, U.S. Fish and Wildlife started moving fish like crazy. And so we started jumping outside of those river drainages. When it was the single species or multiple species in river drainage, their timing of spawning and their habitat preference is what deterred hybridization.
Okay.
But now you introduce some of those species into the new river drainage, in their habitat selection or their timing of reproduction now overlap with another species, creating hybridization. You take like a species like Alabama bass, which was commonly called a spotted bass. It will hybridize with just about every black bass species and has very strong genetics, and over time will basically swamp that population, and it will just be Alabama bass. So it gets very complicated, Paul.
That is wild.
Absolutely.
That is absolutely wild. I have this cool thing where I catch a bass. I'm like, dude, that's a bass.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all I know.
Nope.
I mean, and if I were to go to where I fish, generally Michigan, and catch a bass and this bass, I would have no idea the difference.
Yeah. Yeah. This bass is a Florida. Your bass in Michigan should be a northern largemouth bass. Should be.
Yeah.
I always joke, like, for our clients, we offer Florida bass F1, which is the cross between first generation cross between Florida and northern, and we offer northern bass. But whenever we do genetic sampling on populations, we never find a pure northern bass. It's always like at least 20% Florida or something like that, because they just don't exist in Texas anymore.
Really?
Now, where you're at, I would guess we could find one, a pure northern.
Probably one or two in the whole state of Michigan or Ohio.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Texas is like a strange place to me as a northern person, because it's like, I don't want this to sound offensive. It's like a zoo. Everything's all mixed up and arranged differently with the animals and the fish.
Right.
Does this cause any problems from a conservation standpoint? Is this like, I mean, bass are bass and whatever. Is there anything that this causes conflict with, like with local populations, or does it even matter because they're all private lakes and stuff?
No, I mean, we had an issue within Texas. Smallmouth bass were introduced in the 70s and 80s.
Okay.
And we have a species of black bass called a Guadalupe bass that occurs in about 4 river drainages right here in central Texas. We would be at we're actually a little bit too far north right here. But smallmouth bass will hybridize with them. And as they did genetic testing into the 90s, there weren't many pure Guadalupe bass left. They were being integrated with the smallmouth, and smallmouths were taking over. So we had to set up a fish hatchery, partner with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Texas Parks and Wildlife. They set up a fish hatchery and specifically raised Guadalupe bass, and then started pushing those smallmouth bass out using electrofishing and different techniques to reintroduce a native species, which is actually our state fish. We almost lost our state fish from some of these issues. So I could see how, as you know, from up north, you look at our high game fence ranches and some of the exotic species laws we have, and it does seem a little strange. But Texans are conservationists,
absolutely.
First and foremost. And when we recognize a problem, we address it quickly.
Mm-hmm. I don't have I don't know enough about it to even scratch the surface. Just as an outsider observing it, I come down here, I'm like, what are all these weird ungulates running around? Like, I don't know what that is, but it looks like it's from outer space,
right.
And it's cool. And learning about all these issues is important. Getting people informed about it is important, because it's just like conservation for me is like what it's all about. Mm-hmm. Do either of you know what are the major fish conservation issues that we're running into in Texas specifically? Because everywhere I go, I'm like, what's the problem that people need to be aware of, and how can we fix it?
Yeah, I think, for us, the state is so big, right? Mm-hmm. Exotic species are always on the forefront. You have giant salvania, you have water hyacinth. Those are in kind of East Texas issues. As you move to Central Texas or North Central Texas, you have zebra mussels. And as you move to West Texas, we have golden algae. And all of those create different unique problems. We have a lot of conservation around our alligator gar species, especially in the Trinity River. It's very important to make sure that like those ancient fish can still spawn, reproduce. And we have, one of the bigger issues is whenever you put dams on rivers and you have a species that needs flood water and things like that to spawn, it starts to fracture that habitat. As you move really far west, then we have a lot of like pup fish and small, species of real conservation need that are not drought tolerant, and so we can lose some of those species. But in general, it always comes down to a conflict with invasive species or water management. That's where it lies.
Yeah, the water's a big deal. The water, I mean, 90% of conservation issues in the West are water related, from what I can see. I mean, in the Great Lakes, we have a lot of water and we take it for granted and we just abuse the crap out of it, and which leads to a whole another set of issues in and of itself. But water is like, it's weird that as human beings, we take it for granted so much, because it's like, without water, we're done.
Right.
Everything's done. It's not just you and me. There's some weird things that can live in like the bottom of the boiling ocean or something, but that's pretty limited.
Yeah, it is. And you think about the Great Lakes. I mean, let's talk about some of the conservation needs you guys have there.
A lot of them.
One water quality one that Kanyan deals with back home is cyanobacteria blue-green algae. You have those blue-green algae blooms, and I
live near Toledo where they shut down our water supply because of the algae blooms. It's bad. It's like a big deal up there. It's terrible.
So here we have that same issue. Kanyan, you guys had a dog that had...
Yeah, we had a Rottweiler drink from a pond and died from blue-green algae.
It's toxic. It's really terrible. Yeah,
and my parents actually sent that sample in to the lab, and they said within 30 seconds it was blooming. 30 seconds.
I believe that.
And that dog died within a couple hours.
Yep.
That's terrible.
And so that's one of our focuses. We partnered with a company called Water IQ, and Water IQ makes this floating pulse unit. It creates a sonic pulse in the water, and it will rupture the blue-green algae cells and kill them within minutes. It makes them fall to the bottom and they drown. And so, like,
game changer.
Yeah, for us, like Kanyan's, she's doing her water quality test. She's taking her pictures, her plankton samples. But if we see blue-green algae and it becomes an issue, we can check for what kind of microtoxins they have. And if it becomes an issue, we could put the Water IQ system in and eradicate that blue-green algae and move on to the next lake.
Yes.
That's really
we can walk away and feel safe about it.
So, I mean, what are some of your major responsibilities in what you do, like working?
So, my major responsibilities would probably be just managing the lake to how the client wants it, but kind of also how we see fit and educating them with it. And so some of my daily tasks would be filling feeders, vegetation control, habitat structures, any maintenance work on the fish feeders. I spend majority of my time fishing, 3-4 hours a day, fishing,
That's
harvesting.
Tragic.
Oh, it's a horrible job. It's so bad. But with fishing, I collect all that data, get the links and the weights, and we have, going back to technology and marketing, we have a Google Drive that we put together with each folder, has their client's name, and then that link will be sent to the client. And within that folder, we have all the data with each month I visit. So they have what time I get there, temperatures, wind, any pictures I take of fish, vegetation. I mean, it pretty much has all of it. And then the best part is at the client's fingertips.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you a scenario. I'm a dude. I'm a big Texas oil tycoon. I got this sweet property. I'm obsessed with bluegill. I want the biggest panfish, bluegill, whatever you guys call them down here. Everybody does it different. They call them brim.
Okay.
This drives me nuts. You call them brim. They also call them perch.
Perch.
But perch for me is yellow perch. I don't know any other perch. But anyway, I call them panfish. So we're all on the same page here. We're speaking foreign languages, Panfish, bluegill, whatever you want to call them. I want the biggest bluegill I've ever seen in my life in my pond. That's all I care about. The rest, no bass. I could never catch a bass again. I want the best bluegill ever. How do you go about, what are you going to do? My pond is a fresh blank slate for you to figure out how to give me the biggest bluegill ever.
Oh, man. Stock it with copper nose sunfish and red ear sunfish. So red ear will eat the parasites. And so as we tell clients, every single new fishery, it's really good to stock red ear because they will come in and eat the parasites. And then it's healthy for your fish. And then we stock...
Well, the copper nose bluegill.
Yeah.
I don't know what that is.
Yeah. So that's a strain.
fish.
It's a strain of bluegill out of Florida.
Okay.
And so they do have a larger advanced size. And so we stock the copper-nosed bluegill. And then for trophy sunfish, I mean, the most important part is sunfish eat insects, red ear eat the snails that provide the parasites. So most important part is you can't just grow more insects. Like you can only, there's X number of insects and that's what there is. So we got to provide a food source that will let them grow to an exceptional size. So most often we do that with a fish feeder. So we feed a high protein fish food. We use this brand called Optimal Fish Food. They special blend it and then extrude it to be like elongated. It looks like a little mealworm. And so when it comes out of the feeder, the fish immediately are aggressive to it because they think it's a natural food item. But it's really high in protein, and then it has amino acids that make it extremely digestible. So now we can put in the food to grow the bluegill to the size we want them to grow. And we do have clients that grow bluegill up to 3 pounds. The world record on red ear is 5.5 pounds at Lake Havasu. So we still have a long way to go to kind of get to where we need to be if we were talking about like true world class. But, a 2.5, 3 pound bluegill that's hard to beat.
I've never caught one that big.
The other key to it that makes bluegill kind of difficult long term is they reproduce often. In Texas, they'll reproduce every 28 to 30 days. As long as water temperature is between 65 and 80. Well, that turns out to be 6, 7, maybe 8 times depending on the year. So whenever you have that much reproduction, you have too many males in the lake and you'll get some stunting. And so we have to put in either a predator that will consume those, like a hybrid striped bass, or we have to manage a 2-tiered fishery where we're managing trophy bluegill along with stunted largemouth bass that maybe don't get over 12 inches. So we put a lot of largemouth bass in, and their competition amongst themselves, eating those small bluegill limits the bluegill density, but it also limits their growth.
Hey, what's up everyone? James Appleton here, co-founder of Absolute Aid. Welcome to the Seek to Do More program. This program will help you help yourself by developing the daily habits that will elevate your entire life. Over the next 30 days, you'll complete the doers list every single day. And the doers list includes 1, do something physical. 2, follow and stick to your diet of choice. 3, read a real book. 4, further your education on purpose. 5, dedicate time to your spiritual life. And 6, dedicate time to your hobbies. So if you're ready to take a structured, proven approach to build the daily habits that will allow you to get the most out of yourself, your time, and your life every single day, the Seek to Do More program is your blueprint. So make a choice, commit to yourself, sign up below, and let's get started.
I've noticed fishing personally, just personal anecdote, there's my grandma has a place on a small lake, the one I have a hard time catching big bass. Yeah. There will be years that I go up there and I'm catching huge bluegill.
Right.
And there's years I go up there and I can't catch any bigger than like, I don't know, an inch or 2. They're just tiny. Do you think that's a breeding cycle, or you think that's people just catching the big ones and keeping them, and then it's like this big 2-year or 2 before they grow big enough?
Right.
It's just a thing I noticed, because it's like across the board. Like some days years I'll just be like, I can't catch a small bluegill. And then other years it's not.
As a general rule, your larger bluegill are males. And especially up north, catching panfish and consuming them is still fairly popular. So you will have cycles of those males move shallow to spawn, they become more vulnerable to angler harvest, and we see that. You'll also see it in size classes, as in, a certain percentage of fish are going to die out of age every single year. So you're going to see those cycles occur. Most likely what you're seeing is the stage of bluegill reproduction. Those males, the bigger bluegill, will be offshore. They will be around some sort of habitat. They'll be stationary. And then when it becomes time to spawn, they'll move as a school into an area and spawn. And then if you're not following that movement, you could miss those fish completely, where 2 weeks later, you're sitting in that same spot fishing and they've moved up and it's much easier to catch them. So I think it's probably more cyclic and seasonal.
Is it true that because fish don't have eyelids when it's bright out, they go to deeper water? Is that also a myth?
That's a myth, yeah. Yeah, that's a myth. They don't have eyelids, but sunlight doesn't affect their eye in the way that, like, if we look at the sun, we get blinded. It's not going to affect their eye in that same way because of how it refracts through the water. Now, they will change color based on depth and sunlight. The shallower they are, the clearer the water is, the more sunlight, they'll get darker in color. So we do see some of those, physical changes, but it doesn't hurt their eyes. No.
That's funny. That's hilarious. I read that in like an in-fisherman book.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No, they will prefer shade, but once again, that's more of a evolutionary tactic to where they're trying to hide in a shade line and ambush prey.
Okay.
Rather than, they're trying to escape sunlight.
Do you have any other common fish lies?
Oh man. How about if I catch this little fish and I put it back because I want it to grow bigger?
It's not true.
Fish have no age-determined weight.
Okay.
Right? So it doesn't matter. I can look at a fish and be like, it's a little guy and it's young and put it back. And in reality, that fish could be 10 years old. Fish grow through what's called indeterminate weight. So it's based solely on what they eat and how quickly they eat it. So just like we were talking about that exceptional fish and how many pounds it needs, they need, for largemouth, 10 pounds of forage to gain 1 pound. Mm-hmm. If they don't get that this year, but they eat enough maintenance weight, they'll stay that same size. Whenever we're talking about a fish that's 6 inches long, the maintenance weight is almost nothing. So it can just eat that same amount of forage and stay 6 inches its entire life. If it gets 10 pounds of forage that year, it's going to grow up to a different size. Now it needs that maintenance weight again, but to look at a fish and be like, it is small, therefore it is young, is not true.
My whole life is a lie. Everything I've ever learned is a lie.
More often than not, it is a younger fish, but that's not concrete fact ever.
No, that's funny. I love dispelling common like things that you hear all the time, because I've found that most of it's just not true. Like I hear a lot of stuff about barometric pressure. Does that really have an effect?
Oh, is that barometric pressure has an effect. Moon phase can have an effect. Feeding windows where, we have an aggressive feeding because of moon phase, that can have an effect. It's just unbelievable. All the little things that.
I got another one.
Okay.
You want to fish. This is what I've heard, and many, many people have told me this. You want to fish where the side that the wind is blowing towards, because it's going to blow the food that they're eating to that side of the lake.
No, you see some of that. Yeah, okay, absolutely.
That's true.
You see
that logically, that makes sense.
Yeah, you see, especially juvenile fish, they can't control their movement as easy. You see schooling fish will usually go to those wind-blown banks. There's also a good one that is true, is 90% of the fish are in 10% of the water. That is very true. We see that on electrofishing where, electrofishing is where we put electricity into the water to temporarily stun the fish to capture them and collect data. Mm-hmm. But if I just turn it on and I start driving down the bank, we'll find windows or pockets where we catch 10 fish. And then we might go 10 minutes and catch no fish. Mm-hmm. And then all of a sudden we start catching fish again. Usually that's habitat related. But definitely the majority of fish are schooled or in smaller areas.
Yeah, structure is a big deal for fish.
Habitat is very important.
Is the big one that I hear a lot of people argue about is catch and release. There's always this battle of like, should you keep it and eat it? Because the argument against catch and release, which I'm sure you're highly aware of, is not so much with bass, but like just fish that you would normally eat, is do you let them go and they have a chance of dying anyway, or do you keep them and eat them? Is there a higher chance? I know it stresses the fish out, obviously, if they get caught and you release them. Do you think that's true? Or do you know factually or not if that's true?
So angling mortality is real.
Yeah,
and it varies based on season, the depth you catch the fish in, and where the fish is hooked, and what the out of water time is, and did you transfer a bunch of bacteria onto that fish? And there is a thing of delayed mortality as well, to where I do everything right. Maybe I had dry hands and I touched that fish and it got bacteria transfer, and 2 weeks later it has a bacterial infection and that causes issues and maybe it dies. Depending on all those factors, though, that mortality could be as low as like 1 to 2%, or it could be up to 30% of just general angler mortality. So whenever we're talking to fisheries managers, we're calculating those things in. We want to know how many anglers, how many hours. There's a reason when those krill survey clerks come by and ask you those questions, they're trying to quantify things like that. As a general rule, advanced adult-sized fish should be released because fish in general will have more eggs, larger eggs, the larger the fish is.
Okay.
So those fish are more valuable to the environment. They're also, if it's a species like largemouth bass, the larger males are what guard the nest. So that ensures nest success. So the larger fish are more relevant, more important to the population. Whenever you harvest for consumption, you should harvest on the lower end, typically, of whatever the harvest regulation is. Because those fish, you'll have some variance. You'll have young fish that are exceptional growers. You'll have older fish that are poor growers, and they're all living in there, but they're competing for forage early in life. And if we remove those fish and consume those fish as our protein source, we will allow more juvenile forage items to grow up to feed the larger fish. And so we'll still have two tiers of that fishery, a harvestable fishery and a trophy or recreational fishery.
Cool. I just had a bunch of truth bombs dropped on me.
Oh, yeah, man.
I love those.
That's so much fun.
It's the best way to learn.
Yeah, it is. So speaking of learning, I like to give people who know what they're talking about. I like to give advice for newer anglers because this stuff gets really intimidating because you watch a lot of stuff read a lot of books. I do as well. And there's a lot of conflicting information. There's a lot of bad information.
Right.
There's a lot of buy our stuff information and people just get so overwhelmed. So do you have any advice for maybe a new person? You've been fishing since forever.
Yes.
For a new angler, what would you suggest? How do you start if you're,
Yeah, so today if you look on the internet, you really can't trust anything what the internet says, and you don't know if it's true or not. It could be, but 100% you don't know. And so I think my advice would be just do it yourself. Go out there, try it for yourself, and kind of make your own thoughts and opinions about it instead of trying to listen to what someone says or look up videos or, just kind of do it on your own.
Hold on. I've got to interject because I'm smiling inside right now.
Yeah.
Because I'm so close to her dad. We own a company together. We travel together. And people ask him this question all the time. It's a similar question to what you just asked. And his answer every single time is, for every angler out there, there's no right way, there's no wrong way, there's only your way. And he says it that exact way every time. And that's what I just heard from Kanyan.
It's true. Every single angler, every single person has their own way of doing it. So if I tell you something, it might not work for you. So I strongly believe that every person has to do their own thing and kind of figure it out on their way.
Yeah, I totally would agree with that 100%. I learned how to fish by fishing a lot. Right. Reading books doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
Watching tutorials doesn't work or hurt. But in an example yesterday, I was fishing Turner, the Ranch Ferry, and I were all out there fishing at the same time.
Right.
We were throwing 3 different baits.
Right.
One guy I was throwing a shaky head. Turner was throwing a wacky worm, and Ranch Ferry was throwing a crankbait. We all caught fish.
Right.
Yeah.
But you go on channel or something and they're like, oh, this is the only thing you could ever use. I'm like, well, I've never caught a fish on a crankbait. Maybe I'm just not a good crankbait fisher.
Right.
But I can catch them on a worm like crazy.
Yeah.
You have to have confidence in what you're doing. And, another thing your dad always says is the magic lure is the one that's tied on the end of your line at the time that you throw it.
That's true.
Absolutely.
That's the magic one. You don't chase this specific lure, always catch them in all situations. That doesn't exist. You have to have confidence in what you're doing.
And on the flip side of that, what's your favorite bass fishing technique?
Uh-oh. She's got one.
Oh, man, what is it?
I know it. I'm not telling. Let's see if you get it right.
Mine would be throwing a spinnerbait.
That's so true.
Okay.
I love that type of fishing.
What attracts you to it? Just
the way they hit it.
Okay.
You got one. It's the way they bite it, and then the adrenaline rush. It's just, I love it.
And this always cracks me up because Gary Klein is world famous for the flipping technique. He brought that from the West. He learned it from D. Thomas, and he brought it from the West. And he's world famous for the shallow water, close quarter flipping technique. And his daughter loves to throw a
Hey,
spinnerbait.
you gotta switch it up every now and
Reminds
then.
me so much of
Rebellious.
Yeah.
There you go.
Reminds me so much of Ken Cook, who was a fisheries biologist and professional angler who fished a spinnerbait all the time. And it's so funny, you know, whenever we look at right now, like the trends in fishing, spinnerbait is on the very lowest rung of that. You know, it's fallen from graces. And Gary Klein's daughter is throwing a spinnerbait. I mean, to the point where a lot of days I'll call her and I'll say, have you caught any fish today? And she'll say no. And I'm like, take the spinnerbait off. Like,
He does.
Let's start with that. Let's just
But
try something else.
but then it goes back to saying that you gotta do your own thing.
You got to do your own
You
thing
can't walk in other people's shoes.
unless it's not working.
If all else fails, I tie on a Ned rig. That usually will catch something.
Exactly. Yeah. And so as we go down her list, if it's not a spinnerbait, then what is your next go-to?
Crankbait.
Okay. And then next?
Probably a soft plastic, some type of
And
worm.
how's it rigged?
Wacky.
So we all have our own. Yeah, that's very cool.
We all have our own techniques.
And Gary's not, I mean, he'll throw a crankbait, but
I'll throw it for him.
Well, what do you like? What's your go-to?
I think the most versatile bait would be a jig. A jig,
I've caught bass on jigs a lot.
you can fish them in so many different ways, and there's depending on the skirt and the head and the trailer, you can make them do a lot of things. I think that's whenever we talk about pond fishing, it's hard to beat a smaller jig. I think also you could put crankbait or more like a square bill crankbait to be more specific. It's a very versatile bait, helps you get around structure and fish it a little bit better. And you know, I'm more that kind of power fisherman where I want to just make a lot of casts and move down the shoreline. So whenever I'm fishing with her dad, you know, he's always close quarter and I'm doing something random behind him, trying to sneak one out.
When I'm with my buddies, my biggest thing is we can't all be throwing the same thing.
Oh no, you never
Please,
should. Yeah.
everybody tie on something different, so
Yep.
we'll see what works. And if something's working, we're going after it.
Yeah, then
most
we'll all
of the
be there.
time, we don't catch anything because we're terrible fishermen.
Well,
no,
you're in Ohio, so you got
it
an
doesn't
excuse.
help. Walleye, that's where we shine. But
Okay.
do you think that this is something? I bought a bait once. It was just a crankbait. It looked like a real bluegill. Like
Right.
it was painted. It was beautiful. It cost me like $18. And I know that it's probably not going to do anything for it. Do you think that that's effective? Because from my perspective, which is not very good one, if it looks like something they're going to eat naturally, that would be like a pretty good bait. Do you think those are effective?
Well, let's think about vision for a second. And a fish, you know, depending on the vision that it has, how far it can see, is going to be dictated by color and clarity. So the clearer the water is, the further the fish can see. When you're throwing a crankbait, it's creating vibration. That fish will feel vibration before it will see bait. So it's going to feel that within the lateral line. The lateral line, of course, is a line that runs down both sides of the fish's body, but in actuality, it's small pores that have hairs within them that connect straight to the spinal cord. So it can feel those vibrations from much further away. That's how it's going to locate to then look at bait. So the color of the lure may be important in triggering the strike, but not locating the food item, right? So if you're throwing a bluegill crankbait first, it has to make the right vibration to attract the fish. Then the fish has to decide it's a food item, or you have to be fishing in a way that it doesn't get a chance to make that logical thought. If fish can logically think in the first place, you know, well, that's a whole different debate.
To fish study philosophy.
Right. But you have to make it react. And so having that color may be important, especially in clear water.
Okay.
The more turbid the water becomes, the less it becomes important.
And then I think my final question is, does the fishing pole matter?
Yes. That is the most closed answer I can give you. Yes. Your fishing pole matters for the type of lure that you're throwing.
Okay.
Because you need, in some lures, you need leverage. In other lures, you need the blank of the rod to bend or move to give you the vibration of the lure. Whenever you're fighting the fish, it becomes even more important because your center point on that rod where it's bending will dictate how you need to retrieve, what angle you need to retrieve at. Also, the rod can dictate casting distance. So the rod does become very important. I mean, as you progress in your angling abilities, I would expect you to go from like, oh, I own 1 rod to 3 rods to 5 to 30. I mean, eventually
I'm already at the 15 mark.
Yeah, so
I
you're
hope my
doing
wife
good.
doesn't listen to this.
You're doing really good. And then you'll start matching rods to reels to line weights and types. And you'll have what you find to be the best for the lure type you're fishing. So if I'm fishing a square bill crankbait and I'm fishing a heavy cover jig, that is 2 different rods. The hook set is different, the line is different, the reel is different, all that components, but you have to fit it to your style. Everybody has different arm lengths, muscle mass, heights, weights, all those things. So there's no way that a rod that's perfect for me is perfect for you.
And I've heard a lot of people talk about bringing like glass rods are coming back. Is there any advantage to that? Because I'm thinking like, if I would buy a glass rod. It just sounds cool. I can be like, I have a glass rod, so peasants can. No, I'm just kidding.
It depends on the lure and the line and all
fish
those other
with?
things. Well, I mean, it depends. If it's a stiffer rod, stiffer rod, I wouldn't fish the spinnerbait or something like that with it. I would fish a jig or something where what I need to do is move that bait quickly through the water. So I'm going to flip it out. It's going to touch the bottom. I'm going to get a bite, and I want to be able to get a lift without having much give in the rod. So, a glass rod would have its place. Yeah.
The name glass rod makes it sound breakable, but I think they're like one of the sturdiest rods.
Yeah, they're fiberglass, so it's very sturdy.
Cool. Well, I learned a lot. You both are awesome. You have a lot of
you.
great information and facts to share with the world. I'm going to have to sit and ponder everything you've told me today. I feel like my life has just come crashing down in my fishing side of my brain with all the great facts, which is good.
It's part of your fishing evolution.
Yes.
From caveman to modern man.
But if you're a good conservationist and a steward and all those things, a good outdoorsman, you want to learn every day.
I do.
You're observing when you're out there. Whenever you're in the office or it's bad weather day, you're on YouTube, you're reading, you're doing those things. It's like Kanyan said, it's not all 100% fact. Don't think of it that way. Think of it as I'm gaining information, then I'm going to go out in the real world and see what it looks like.
Yeah, and before we wrap up, people want to hire you to come fix their lakes up with the biggest bass you've ever seen. I can vouch for you because I literally caught the biggest bass of my life in an hour of being here.
Right.
So congrats, you do good work. Where can they find you guys and get you to come fix their stuff up for them?
Yeah, if they want to go to the website, txprolake.com, you can find me on social media at txprolake and then Kanyan Catch.
Yeah, Kanyan Catch. I'm starting a blog. It's a process, but I'm working on it. So Kanyan's Catch.
All right. Well, thank you both so much. I think we should actually go fishing. That would probably be a good thing to do.
That'd be great.
Yeah,
Actually,
so
we're going to
round rods.
Round Table. We're going to go talk about conservation.
Let's go.
Yeah.